All right, unfortunately our Nocturne's not likely going to survive. So while the first couple videos of the expansion were space dragons, obviously other mechanics exist in the set, and some of them are Daybreak, some of them are Nightfall, and so we are going to be playing a list that is very Nightfall heavy. This is your pretty standard Nocturne Diana list. There is a couple of Daybreak units working to our advantage, mostly for turns like this. We can go with a nice solid 1-2 to push a lot of damage, and with them not playing a blocker here, that's exactly what we're going to see, is a lot of damage. But I do have some other like Nightfall takes. I've got what I consider to be a theme deck that's Leona Diana. I'm not necessarily convinced that's the way to play the Daybreak Nightfall archetypes, but obviously you want to play around with it, and I might do a video on them at some point just because I think it's fun and cheeky. All right, a couple of different options here, but I think that the best one, believe it or not, is to go digging. This lets us apply a lot of early game pressure. This is the only Cygnus in the deck, and this is a beautiful finisher. So this is not necessarily an easy decision, but I think you go with the early pressure, just given the state of our hand currently. And then I think we do this because this still lets us potentially threaten. I mean, I'd love to block the Callista. I guess we didn't need to play that. That actually might be a misplay there. I think instead we wanted to bank our spell mana so that we can always have this available. But we're gonna go pretty wide here, I think. I don't suppose this is the kind of deck that runs Withering Wail. That's a pretty good way to get in our face, though. Let's go ahead and give ourselves some elusive action and an onlooker. There's an argument to be made actually as well about leaving that back and instead triggering horror this turn and then using this into this later. But we're just gonna do it. Let's push the damage.
You have earned your fate.
So they're fine with sacrificing these because they're trying to give themselves ways to trigger her. But that's all the more reason why we potentially should have not played the onlooker, because now we'd be in a position to ping her. Though we actually are, so as long as the first action they take isn't like a ravenous butcher, because you can't respond to that. So like a butcher here is very painful. Otherwise, this is going to be a pretty great turn for us. Like they might try to glimpse this, but then we can memories it and then try to ping this in response, and then they'd have to have a second way to save her. And so that's exactly what we're gonna do here. So a second glimpse obviously gets the job done. They don't have it, so that is beautiful. And we get another Doombeast to boot. So we can Doombeast this turn, and then next turn keep her into Doombeast, and that will spell Doom for them. I mean, considering it's just Callista and this is Freljord, I have to assume this is a They Who Endure list. And I just don't think they've got any great ways to come back from the lead we've established at this point. Back up Callista, so that's great for them. So again, go with this because it lets us develop Doombeast, but also since we made an ephemeral copy, we're gonna get a 4/3 in return. And with this Doombeast trigger, it means we're really only going to need to find one extra damage somewhere, assuming that this finds its way home. Bit of a visual lag or visual delay there, but not the end of the world. Alright. 4 mana means no Withering Wail or Grasp, so healing in that regard not great. Okay, they have missed. So I was gonna say maybe it's something like Vile Feast, but this has got to be it. So we're gonna be going to a second game here in just a minute, but just cheap, fast start gets the job done. Like I said, this is a pretty standard list. At the end of this video, I'll go through the list, talk about the inclusions, but kind of builds itself. Let's play another game. All right, so this is going to be a bit more difficult as far as a game 2 goes. And this is actually a list I haven't seen in a while. I think that the list itself is still incredibly strong, but not a lot of people have been playing it because there's nothing new and flashy about it. So this is just your standard Twisted Fate Ezreal deck.
We were peaceful.
Go ahead and do this. But as I was saying before, it's
Their scent travels in the night.
still really strong. And it's great as far as its matchup against us. Now, we're likely going to eat a Mystic Shot here.
I cherish, Moon Sister.
Or a Beam. Okay. But either way, like, you can't play around it. I mean, unless you want to wait long enough for her to level up. But if they don't have it, then obviously you get an attack with a Nightfall unit, which helps you triggering your good friend Nocturne there.
Store the rations, shackle the prisoners. Double pay for the next kill.
You leave me no recourse.
They're just gonna block something better anyway, so we're gonna take it. And we're gonna pass and bank spell mana, but also we're passing because we want to be able to daybreak into Nightfall here.
Ours is the one true light. Yeah, you don't want to cross me. Devotion to battle.
All right, we're gonna try this
Take it up with my
because I was gonna say we want our 1-drop to trade with the 3/3 if possible. Doesn't mean that we're pushing damage, unfortunately. Like I said, I think this is just a bad matchup for us.
safety will cost you.
We want that to trigger its Nightfall next round for sure. So we can do it this round. Yeah, I'd rather do it this round because the vulnerable does not go away at end of turn. And that's really all we care about, just being able to have that at vulnerable, and then next round yeah, let's potentially get this out of the way as well. So we might lose our Nocturne here, but the thing is we knew we wanted to play this on curve. This is just a house on curve. The extra stats, however, are only until the end of the round, so whenever you can get value out of it with something like this, you are working stuff in your favor. Again, we're trying to, I think, protect our Nocturne, but we also want to attack with him to get the triggers so that he's close to leveling. All right, unfortunately, our Nocturne's not likely going to survive. Now that he's down to 1 health, Static Shock, Parlay. We don't want to trigger this turn. Wow. I think we take this. We're gonna play this and probably bank the spell mana, but so while I was considering Cygnus as a potential finisher, now I think we just keep playing beefy boys. Like this turn was gonna be Soldier into Cygnus. They got the warning shots. The only thing saving us right now is that Ezreal hasn't flipped yet.
Got a surprise for him. Who's falling for blood?
It's interesting they didn't want to send them. I mean, they'd be giving away value trades, so I guess I get it. Similarly, because of the overwhelm, I think we let this go. Where I'll be at 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Essentially, they could burst us out, but I think it's a risk we have to take. If these had 4 health instead of 3, I would 100% use Cygnus, but the likelihood of them having like get excited or something I think is too high. So I think we just play more beef. I think we play more beef and we do something like this. Now, there's an argument to be made about maybe this one instead goes in front
You got legs. Use them.
of another unit. So like you could use this one here so they can't get trades, but this is enough for lethal. So we hit okay and we're excited. All right. We won this, I think mostly because they had a bad draw, but nonetheless, we'll go take a look at the list and I'll talk through the inclusions, but it builds itself. So the thing about Nightfall is you want to have a solid number of triggers, meaning things you play to trigger Nightfall. And then you also have to have, you know, a critical mass, obviously, of Nightfall units. This actually might be overboard. There's a argument to be made that maybe you cut things like Lunari Priestess because it might be a little bit too much, but I like making sure that I have a good number of units to level up both Diana and Nocturne. Nocturne's the big one because he's your primary finisher in the list, though I do have a couple of others on the top end. We've seen them in that second game, actually, both of them, but we're going to start at the bottom, work our way through the list. So right out of the gate, Fading Memories. I run this as a 2 of. If you want to run it as a 3 of, I do not blame you. It's a great inclusion in a list like this. Why? 0 cost, burst speed, and you can copy things that have come into play effects. So the 0 cost means it's great for triggering Nightfall. Burst speed means you can play it and then play your Nightfall unit, so you don't have to worry about any sort of like 1-2 punch if you're trying to play just one thing and then move to attack as opposed to an open attack. Downside though, obviously it makes it an ephemeral unit, but even if you're using it on something like Dustbringer to just give yourself even more petals for later, if you want to use it on again things like where to go Priestess to generate additional cards, or what I most likely end up using it on is whatever cool things my opponent is playing. It's just a great inclusion in the list. Duskbringer is here largely because of the petal. So Duskbringer itself is a cheap activator for Nightfall, but if you play it on turn 1, you still have another activator for later. Again, burst speed. Now, the net cost reduction here kind of doesn't matter because you're paying 1 to get 1 less, but the reason it does matter again is because it lets you play a unit with Nightfall. So that's why you run this unit. 100%. I'm also running Solari Soldier. Why? Because it is a 1-drop that has a beautiful set of stats that you can play to then trigger your other Nightfall units. Much like Dustbringer, this is a great way to start your turn off if you want to then follow it up by playing a Nightfall unit. Now, one thing that you got to get used to when you're playing this list is understanding when to play your Nightfall units and when to go for the open attack. This is a list where sometimes you can punish yourself by trying to be too greedy, meaning there are plenty of opportunities where you should likely just take an open attack and then play your Nightfall units after the fact. But I think that folks get so caught up in the like, I want to play my stuff and then attack, and even more so, that means I have to play like 2 or 3 things because I want to trigger my Nightfalls. And in doing so, you're giving your opponent time to respond. This is obviously the sort of thing you want to play and then attack, but things like Duskbringer, you can play afterwards. It's entirely okay. If you have a juicy open attack, it's entirely okay to play like Duskbringer into a Doombeast later on after you've attacked, just to make sure you're still capitalizing on board state. So don't tunnel vision is what I'm trying to say. That's the short version. Stygian Onlooker, again, cheap Nightfall unit, great effect. The big bonus here, in my opinion, is it's just something that helps you stay aggressive early on. Again, if you're attacking on evens and your opener is Soldier into an Onlooker, you're pressuring a lot of damage early, but also you're getting an attack with a Nightfall unit, which helps you to level up your Nocturne. Also, later on, it's a cheap Nightfall activation, which is important for Diana, excuse me, not Nocturne. Nocturne just cares about you playing units once he's leveled up, but we'll get to that in a little bit. So overall, just solid aggressive start. Diana, this is your kind of follow-up / tempo play to your aggressive units. So traditionally, you're going to want to play Diana and then have her chew up chump blockers until she levels up, and then you're going to use her to kind of like chew up the beefy units. It's really weird because she is a support unit for your aggressive list, and it's rare that you have like a build around champion like Diana is and not have her be your win condition, but she's not. And Leona's the same way. I talked about this when I was kind of working through the reveals. Diana is an interesting unit to me because she's definitely still a build around unit, but her payoff is that she facilitates your other units to finish the game for you. It's really rare that she's the one ending the game, but she is ending the game by being a great challenger unit. You just have to make sure your board state can support that. She's not like an Ezreal where you level her up and then Ezreal just wins you the game, right? Leona is again the same way. So it's very interesting that the Solar Sisters, the Solar Lovers, whatever you want to call them, both kind of function the exact same way, but with different mechanics. So anyway, Diana's there to chew up blockers. Shadestalker is one of those great units that is just kind of good all the time, even in non-Nightfall based decks. If I was running anything kind of aggressive or up tempo that has Targon, I would be running Shadestalker. It would also not shock me if at some point this becomes a 2/2. This card is really good. All right, Pale Cascade. I'm currently only running 2. I've seen a lot of lists that run 3, and I'm fine with that as well. The only reason I don't like running 3 is because it can be a bit clunky at times. The nice thing is obviously the Nightfall trigger, because it draws 1, keeps your card economy strong so that you can keep your hand full. But you don't have to use it for that. This is actually one of the few Nightfall cards where if you just have to play it as a buff, that's entirely fine. A lot of times I'll sacrifice the draw on this to trigger Nightfall on some of my other units. But again, I'm currently only running 2. Stalking Shadows. This has replaced Glimpse in a lot of my Shadow Isles lists because it is a pay 2 to draw 2 card, but you don't have to sacrifice one of your own units. And yes, one that you get is ephemeral, but being able to copy 2 really key units is huge. You get a choice, which is also nice. It's burst speed, which is nice. This is also, again, a great card to play first and then trigger your Nightfall units, and so the burst speed matters even more in that situation. So overall in this list, I think this is superior than Glimpse, and I really like it, and so we run 3. Unspeakable Horror, this would be Vile Feast in most other Shadow Isle lists, but obviously Nightfall is a thing, and so we run it for the Nightfall triggers. Crescent Guardian, a 3-cost 5/3 Overwhelm is a house for stats. This is one of your heavy hitters in the list. It's been performing very well for me. Doombeast is your used cask salesman, if you will, for this list. It's a 3-cost 3/2 that does 2 to your opponent. Granted, this is situational, but again, it's a Nightfall unit, so it helps with leveling your Nocturne and your Diana. Priestess, this is, in my opinion, potentially the weakest unit in this list. And the reason why is because all of the other units are like Nightfall, get insane stats, or do something up tempo. And this one is more like Nightfall, and maybe I get something really useful, or maybe I just kind of get extra garbage. But the 2/1 stat line kind of doesn't make it worth it. So if there was any Nightfall units I would consider replacing, it would be this, and I would either go with something, again, cheap and or aggressive to help further establish my board state to capitalize, or I would try to just find something else that replaces itself by drawing a card, because that's ultimately what she's here for. She's here for Nightfall and for your card economy, but she is, in my opinion, the weakest of the Nightfall units in this list. Nocturne. All right, so we're to finishers now. Nocturne's a big deal. I'm actually going to circle back to him. So for other finishers, I'm currently running 1 Cygnus, 2 Sun Guardians. I like the Sun Guardians because they're always great on curve. You play and forget. You get a lot of damage out of them. I mean, we saw the power of them in that second game. Cygnus here is a little more situational. You kind of have to have a good unit to use it on. Now, that being said, if you trigger his Nightfall, and I say his, but this actually, I guess I can't really tell, could be a her. Either way, if you trigger their Nightfall, Cygnus on something like Crescent Guardian represents a lot of elusive damage, right? It's a great way to close out the game. It's also a great way to protect Nocturne for a turn. But again, situational, because it's only got 2 health. Against some lists, it's just not enough to get the job done. If you wanted to run 3 Sun Guardians, I wouldn't blame you. If you wanted to run maybe more Cygnus to go more on theme, I wouldn't blame you. This is currently the split I run. And then obviously the last card here is Nocturne. So Nocturne does so much for this list. Nocturne is insane. So a 4-cost 5/3 on a champion is already kind of pretty standard, right? You're thinking Ashe probably in that same vein. Nocturne here has Fearsome to protect himself, which helps, but also if you trigger his Nightfall, he is basically like a Frenzied Skitterer effect, and he gives something vulnerable, which is a very big deal because when you're doing that on the turn you play him, if you're looking to attack as well, you give the whole board that power debuff, and then if they still have anything that's big enough to block Nocturne, you likely are giving that vulnerable and pulling it away so that Nocturne still gets through untouched. But whoops, he went away there. The other reason that he's huge is once you flip him, so a 6/4 Fearsome is also nutty, but he gives all your allies Fearsome, and then whenever you play a unit, you give enemies -1/-0 this round, so it's a repeatable Frenzied Skitterer effect. Now, this is interesting because if you've got a flipped Nocturne, you can do something where you are playing some of these cheap 1-drops, right? If you have a flipped Nocturne and then you go like Duskbringer, or let's say it's the start of your turn, it's like Soldier, Duskbringer, Onlooker, you just gave the entire board -3, -0 because all your units when he's flipped have fearsome. It's just like Ash, right? You've basically reached a point where your stuff is unblockable and you're going to close out the game. It's absolutely bonkers. But the other reason that I'm a huge Nocturne fan and what catches some folks off guard at times is you can have an unflipped Nocturne that then flips when you declare your attackers. And as players get more experience with the expansion, this will be less likely, but right now in the early stages, you can catch people off guard with this. You can mess up their math because they're not expecting it to be a 6-4 Nocturne. They're probably banking on it being a 5-3 Nocturne. And so you can, you know, if he's at 3 of 5, but you've got him and another Nightfall unit, you can lock in your attacks so that he then flips and becomes that much more dangerous, potentially surviving trades or what have you. It's just a very useful thing to keep in mind, is that it's when you have declared an attack with 5 Nightfall allies. So the minute that you put all your attackers out and you hit that attack button and then they lock in the blockers, it flips, right? Because it's all said and done at that point. Anyway, as I was saying before, the list kind of builds itself. There is room for you know, you can make some changes here if you want. I still think Priestess might end up being faded out a bit if not completely removed. I don't know. I go back and forth on this. You could consider, for example, removing her to increase your Pale Cascade, and then you could also maybe remove another one to increase Fading Memories, and then go with one more copy of just like an X Factor card. I'd be fine with that as well. She serves a purpose, but she's easily the most underperforming card in the list right now. Outside of that, like I said, it kind of feels like it builds itself, and it's been very effective as an aggressive list. There are some lists I do think that are well positioned against it, so you will have a couple of matchups where you will feel helpless. That's okay. It's a kind of a polarized deck. It either does what it wants to do or doesn't. That being said, you can be a bit clever, so it is a very rewarding list in that, again, Nocturne plays in particular are very satisfying. There are certain moments where you can do something that feels a bit incorrect that ends up being absolutely correct. So again, holding off on playing units for a turn where maybe you pile it on with a flipped Nocturne to get a big swing. You can change this from being an aggressive deck almost to a combo deck in that regards. And there are times where that is the right move, but knowing when to do it is going to take some practice. So if this is a list you like and you're going to put a lot of time into it, I would definitely say go back, maybe watch some of your own games, or at least, you know, reflect on your games and think about times where, you know, maybe you flooded the board where the play was actually to do just enough to like flip your Nocturne and then flood the board on a swing turn. You know, bait out mana, then go ham. So anyway, I'm ranting at this point. It's just a fun list. There's, I think, a lot that I could say about it, but we're at the end. So I love you all. Thanks for watching. I'm hoping to have videos all this week. So we're going to revisit some of the less obvious lists that I've built. I say revisit, I guess visit. We're going to reveal, we're going to showcase some of the less obvious lists that I have built. Things where you're not like, I just play all the Nightfall stuff, or I play the Space Dragon. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching, and till next time.